You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Greeks Gridiron. I'm Ethan Haristadoulou, and today, on this beautiful Tuesday, as we fast approach the start of the 2025 NFL season, and as NFL Cutdown Day is literally happening as I'm recording this here, we are diving into a season preview of none other than the Cleveland Browns. We're showing love to the teams that were at the bottom of the NFL last season and giving them a little bit of a positive outlook here. I'm not going to sit here and act like these teams are all going to be world beaters. They were all picking at the very top of this past NFL draft for a reason, but I want to take a look and preview some of these teams that finished towards the bottom of the NFL and show them some love, because I know it's very easy to forget about these teams and focus on all the playoff teams and everyone that's going to be fighting for playoff spots come season end. I want to show some love to the bottom feeders. So we're looking at the Cleveland Browns, a team that is hoping to find themselves in a better situation this upcoming season. So if you're a Browns fan or you're somebody within that division, comment down below. Let me hear your thoughts on the team, what you expect from them, maybe some stuff that I don't touch on here. These are designed to be quick, so there isn't going to be, so I'm not going through the entire 53-man roster or anything like that. I'm just going over things that I have in mind as we go into the 2025 season for the Cleveland Browns. And I think the first place we have to start is a place that everyone is discussing at length right now. That's got to be the quarterback situation for the Browns. And as it currently stands, the big question is Joe Flacco the right answer for them this season? What are we going to potentially see from a Dillon Gabriel or a Shedeur Sanders as we move our way through the NFL season? I'm not going to get into like the speculation as to just how snaps were being deviated amongst the players and the personnel that all the quarterbacks were being given, because that is a nuanced conversation that the reality is, unless you are within the coaching staff of the Cleveland Browns, regardless of how you may or may not feel about the situation, you don't necessarily know what was going into all that decision making. That being said, looking at just from a quarterback perspective and where the Browns have ended up to this point, we're looking at three quarterbacks as Kenny Pickett is no longer a part of the Cleveland Browns. Joe Flacco is going to be the quarterback one to at least start the season, and then you have Dillon Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders behind him. Now, Flacco brings veteran presence and leadership to the locker room, a steady hand, I guess, if you will, although I don't really know if that's even the right way to put it, because he does bring a very high-risk, high-reward play style at this stage in his career. This is not Joe Flacco making a Super Bowl run way back in the early 2010s. This is Joe Flacco who, since his initial run with the Cleveland Browns back in 2023, has thrown for a total of 17 interceptions between the regular season and the playoffs with both the Browns and the Indianapolis Colts. It's one of those things that he was a piece of what was a complicated blame pie in the just unfortunate ending that was the 2023 Browns season as a whole. So while I understand the decision, at least in the interim, I do have my own feelings as to how this is going to shake itself out. And when you look at Dillon Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders here, listen, regardless of what you may or may not think about Sheduer Sanders, the reality is a lot of people seem to think that Sheduer Sanders should have been picked much higher in the draft than he did. That being said, I think Sheduer Sanders, myself personally, was a better prospect than Dillon Gabriel coming out of the draft. Do I think Sheduer Sanders should have been a fifth-round pick? No. To be honest, no. Do I think that he was supposed to be a first-round selection? Also no. Do I think he was more like a day 2 guy? Yeah. And Dillon Gabriel, probably a day 3 guy. So Sheduer Sanders, for whatever reason, slipped down as far as he did. But I do think that all of this drama that we are seeing surrounding the quarterback situation in Cleveland ultimately does end up with Sheduer Sanders as QB1. It might not be immediately. It's probably going to be a little bit of a ways down the road. I don't want to sit here and act like Joe Flacco can't get the job done, I guess, but the reality is he is, if he's not already 40 years old, he's pushing 40 years old. I don't remember exactly how old Flacco is, but he's not a spring chicken. And again, to go back to the interceptions, he has a very much like a gunslinger mentality, it feels like at this point, where he's launching the football, he's trying to make plays still, and there are a handful of times where that ball is going into the hands of the wrong players. So I do think that all of this noise and drama that we're getting right now in Cleveland ultimately does end with Shedeur Sanders as QB1. It's more just a matter of when, not so much if. And for what it's worth with Dillon Gabriel's situation, the reality is he's not necessarily your prototypical quarterback. And yes, there are guys who have made it through the NFL, not at your prototypical size, but Shedeur Sanders, between just how he played in college and on top of that, him as a human and a little bit more akin to what an NFL quarterback would look like in comparison to Dillon Gabriel, I think Shedeur Sanders is ultimately going to be the starting quarterback for the Browns. It might just not be right away because maybe there's a chance that he does need a little bit more time to develop. I'm not going to sit here and act like the Browns have handled this entire quarterback situation perfectly, but at the end of the day, we are discussing the Browns. Beyond the quarterback situation, though, because there is conversation to be had outside of that, I think we definitely need to turn our attention to the defense here. And this is one of those questions where I'm curious to see if this defense can get back to some of the dominance that we saw from them during the 2023 season. Now, a lot of personnel changing has happened between 2023 and now, but I do still think that there is a core group of guys on this defense that should push them above where they finished last season. And there's a couple other factors as well. But I mean, you look at the numbers, at least statistically speaking, not a great year for Cleveland. 28th in points per game allowed. On top of that, they were 28th in points per game allowed, not 28 points per game allowed. And then on top of that, allowing about 5.5 yards per play last season, which tied them at 8th most with two other teams in the NFL. They had the 9th highest in red zone touchdown percentage allowed. They had their struggles against the run. There was flaws to this defense, don't get me wrong. And I mean, for what it's worth, they were where they were in part because of their play. But there was also another large factor that I think is going to be a little bit better this season, or at the very least you would hope it's going to be, with a veteran presence in Joe Flacco. And that remains to be seen because, like I said, there are turnover concerns that we've seen from Joe Flacco the last couple of years here. Maybe once Shedeur Sanders comes in, he protects the ball a little bit better in my hypothetical scenario that I'm expecting to kind of play itself out. But Cleveland's offense tied for first in the NFL last season with 34 total offensive turnovers. And it was not this, for what it's worth, the Browns defense caught a bad break multiple times throughout last season, whether it was just due to short fields, whatever it may be. So I think with that number probably approaching more towards the median number of the NFL. And then on top of that, they were still a pretty good unit against the pass. Now, there are some factors that could alter how they fare against that this season. We'll get into that in a second here. But I do think there is a possibility that this Cleveland Browns defense, where if you're just looking at strictly points allowed per game as like their overall look of a defense, it's probably going to get better than that this year, and I think that will in turn help out whoever's playing at quarterback. But between just lower turnover expectations and a season reset, I think this Cleveland Browns defense should be better than where they were last year. And while they did let guys like Dalvin Tomlinson or Juan Thornhill go in free agency, you brought in a Malik Collins who has been very reliable as far as defensive linemen go in the NFL on the interior side of things. Joe Tryon-Shoyinka is one of those guys that I'll be curious to see how he fits into things here. The fact that he's getting to play on a defense that it involves a guy like Myles Garrett who takes up a ton of attention could maybe open things up for him because he is a former first-round selection, if I'm remembering correctly, for a reason. Then you have like a veteran and a guy like Jerome Baker who is coming in to help fill a bit of a need at the linebacker spot. And of course, as far as draft selections go, Mason Graham, Carson Schlesinger, like there are some legitimate additions to this defense that should make this unit better overall. And that linebacker room is kind of the one thing I really want to fixate on here because obviously last season, losing Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah was a killer for this defense. He was one of the young rising stars in the NFL up until that injury, and now at this point, he's not playing this upcoming season, and there is definitely some questioning as to what his career is even going to look like down the road. You're looking for guys to step up, and I mean, the way it looks like right now, as far as like your big three linebackers, your Mike, your Sam, your Will, and who's going to be playing the most snaps, it's going to be some sort of combination of Mahmoud Diabate, Carson Schlesinger, and Devin Bush, who ended up playing a lot more than maybe anticipated last season once Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah went down. And then, of course, like I mentioned, Jerome Baker, he's always been like an athletic off-ball linebacker, a guy who can drop back in coverage and be reliable for you. So that's definitely a unit to keep an eye on there. But I think with the added youth and talent that you have in there, you should be okay. Whether they reach the levels of where Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah was going himself personally is one of those things that remains to be seen, but you're at least in a better spot than I think you were in the pinch of last season once he went down. And then, of course, like you look at the secondary, a solid group of guys. Yes, losing Martin Emerson for the season is definitely one of those things that sucks as far as this torn Achilles is concerned. So that is definitely something the Browns will have to work themselves around. But you still have a Denzel Ward. You still have a Greg Newsome. You have Rayshon Jenkins coming into the fold of this defense as well. I feel pretty good. Like, I feel like you have a solid secondary at the worst kind of situation. Like, Denzel Ward's one of those guys that feels like reliable. He's going to come in. He's going to do his thing. He's always someone that you can count on as far as defensive backs are concerned here. And then the defensive front, as you mentioned, I think this is a really good year potentially for this Cleveland Browns unit. Myles Garrett obviously doing his thing as he always does. Mason Graham was one of those guys that a lot of people looked at as like one of the more sure things in the draft, just a really well-rounded overall and polished player coming out of college who should be able to step in and start day one. So I think adding him to work alongside of Myles Garrett, and then of course a lot of eyes are apparently going to be on Alex Wright, who seems to be getting the opportunity to work opposite of Myles Garrett as the starter alongside him. So I think it's going to be a good unit. You still have some pretty good depth there on that defensive line as a whole as well. Of course, Shelby Harris still being there, and he was a big piece of that dominant 2023 defensive front as well. I like where the defense is heading. I think it's going to be a better unit, and when it comes to a strong defense, when we go down that road where Shedeur Sanders ultimately takes over, in my personal opinion, I feel like we're going to see it eventually. I think this will be one of those things that helps out a young Shedeur Sanders as he continues to grow into this league, because I have a really hard time seeing him not being the starting quarterback at some point this season with what we've gotten from Joe Flacco the last couple years of his career. And the last thing I want to look at here, because I think this is one thing you really cannot ignore and I think is an important thing to discuss, what are we going to see with this running back room? Now, again, as I mentioned at the beginning here, the roster cutdowns are happening as I'm recording this. There's a good chance that between when I hit record to when I hit stop record to when I get this out to you all, Quinshon Judkins could have a contract signed, sealed, and delivered. As it currently stands, the 53-man roster has been completely revealed by the Browns themselves on their website. They gave a nice little written breakdown of basically every position group as a whole, and even that's loose verbiage there, because they basically just kind of lumped position groups together. They just lumped O-line together. They lumped the defensive backs together. They lumped the defensive line together the way they were writing things out and breaking it all down, which is fine. The one thing that obviously stuck out to me, there was no real written breakdown for the running back room. Now, obviously, they did list who the running backs were on the roster. You have Jerome Ford returning, and of course, Dylan Sampson, another draft pick they had this year as well, as far as running back goes, unsurprisingly. But it's only two running backs, and in today's NFL, two running backs is simply just not enough for the way offenses work. And so I do expect to see something happen with this running back room. The question now is, when does that happen? Now, the way things currently stand with the Quinshon Judkins situation, like I said, as of me recording this, he has not signed a contract. We've heard that he is not going to be facing any charges or anything like that. That dates back to I believe August 14th when those reports started going out. So it seems like on that front, he's okay. The NFL, of course, always does their investigation, and they ultimately decide which is an interesting thing to say the least, how they dictate whether you did anything wrong or not, despite what actually happens legally in those situations there. It's always an interesting thing to see play out, but it sounds like there's no deal that's going to be put in place until the NFL finishes their investigation, and that's reports coming from Adam Schefter, and whether that's agents trying to push the Browns to make a decision here and put the pressure on the organization to make a signing happen, whatever that may be. A lot of it seems like it's going to come down to money and guarantees, because ultimately a lot of the second round selections got fully guaranteed contracts, and you look at everyone that was picked very closely before and after Quinshon Judkins got guaranteed deals. So there's a lot of nuance to what's going to happen here, but The main reason I'm bringing this up is because in my hypothetical scenario where we eventually see Shedeur Sanders take over, you want to have a sound running game. Obviously, a great defense will help out a young quarterback to help, put them in good spots to be able to manage games and not necessarily have to go out and win with their arm each and every single week. But having a solid running game is always a beautiful compliment as well. And what we've seen from Jerome Ford to this point in his career, I think he's a reliable running back. He does really well in a rotational role. I don't necessarily know if he is running back one material, though. And obviously, you look at Dylan Sampson. What is he going to be coming out of Tennessee in the NFL remains to be seen. There's obviously a lot to like about his game, but the Browns went and got Quinshon Judkins when they did for a reason. He is supposed to be that big difference-making running back, and it's funny enough that they're in a situation with the New England Patriots once again of, here's the two Ohio State running backs, did we take the right one or not kind of deal that's playing itself out. Real interesting scenario there, but they went out and got him for a reason because he's supposed to be a playmaker for them. So we're all going to be sitting here kind of twiddling our thumbs as the Browns kind of work their way through this situation, but it's definitely one of those things to keep an eye on, because if you don't have Judkins and you have to go bring in somebody else, it's not ideal, because it's not what the Browns had in their cards and in their plans for whoever was supposed to be the starting quarterback for this season and ultimately where they landed now. It's just constant question marks surrounding the Cleveland Browns, and it's one of those things that I hope gets resolved sooner rather than later for you Cleveland Browns fans, for the sake of you more than anything else, but also, again, ultimately the young quarterback that I expect to be taking over at some point down the line here. As for my final thoughts and just where I think that this team is going to find itself come season end, I am a little bit concerned about Cleveland, and unfortunately, the way I've kind of seen the Browns situation, until they are completely rid of the Deshaun Watson contract, I don't look at the Browns as a super competitive football team. They finished 3-14 last season, and I do think, or not 3-14, what was it, 4 wins that they had? I forget what it is. But they finished towards the bottom of the NFL last season, and with that, I don't expect much of a difference in where they finished this season. I hate to call a season a lost cause, and maybe I'm wrong completely, because again, the defense could be good enough that maybe they carry them to an extra win or two, but I look at a 5-12 season at best for this Cleveland Browns. It just feels like until you can fully turn the page from Deshaun Watson's situation and just how much cap space he is personally eating up from this team and preventing them from building a supremely talented roster that can actually work with a rookie quarterback in a Sheduer Sanders, this is going to be another long one in my eyes. I could be wrong, fully acknowledge that, but the way things look and the amount of drama we've seen around this team as it stands at the quarterback spot, at the running back spot, I'm kind of fading the Cleveland Browns this season. So I'm sorry, Browns fans. Nothing against Cleveland or anything like that. It's just there's too much noise going on before the season even got rolling for me to really feel good about them. So comment down below. Let me hear from you all. Your thoughts, your opinions on the Browns. What are we going to get from them this season? Anything else that I didn't highlight that you'd like to bring up and discuss as well? But as always, if you made it to the end, I greatly appreciate it. And I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.